All right, we turn now to the rising tensions in the Middle East. Iranians launched more protests against Saudi Arabia on Monday, and the diplomatic rift between the two countries is now spilling over to neighbouring nations.
Iran accuses Saudi Arabia of escalating tensions, while several Arab nations are siding with the Saudis. Hala Gorani has more.
Anger on the streets of Tehran. Thousands in the Iranian capital protest against the execution of prominent Shia cleric Nimr al-Nimr by Saudi Arabia Saturday. Diplomatic ties between the two countries now severed for the first time in a generation. These Saudi diplomats were evacuated from Tehran, arriving in Dubai early Monday.
Saudi Arabia sees not only its interests, but also its survival in the continuation of tensions. Therefore, it has used the issue as another excuse to increase tension and conflict.
In Iraq, protesters also took to the streets. These men rushed the police lines of the Green Zone in Baghdad that guards the Saudi embassy. In another apparent retaliation, broken glass and rubble on the floor of this Sunni mosque. In an interview Monday, the Saudi foreign minister stood by the kingdom's actions, calling Nimr al-Nimr, the Shiite cleric, a terrorist, and extending sanctions against Iran.
We decided to cut off all diplomatic relations with Iran. We will also be cutting off all air traffic to and from Iran. We will be cutting off all commercial relations with Iran, and we will have a travel ban against people traveling to Iran.
MashaAllah! MashaAllah! A firm response from the Saudis 2 days after protesters stormed the Saudi embassy in Tehran. It all started with the execution of the Shiite cleric, an outspoken critic of Saudi Arabia's Sunni rulers. On Monday, Saudi Arabia's allies also cut ties with Iran, Bahrain and Sudan. The UAE has now downgraded its diplomatic team. The breakdown of relations between Iran and Saudi Arabia not only threatens stability on the streets of Tehran and Riyadh, but will only heighten Sunni and Shia tensions across the region. Hala Gorani, CNN, London.
Now, just last hour, I spoke with CNN International diplomatic editor Nick Robertson in Riyadh about the current atmosphere in Saudi Arabia.
The main banner headline is that the cut in economic ties with Iran, the cut and halting of flights between Iran and Saudi Arabia. They say that still the pilgrims, many tens of thousands, come every week or so from Iran to Saudi Arabia to go to Mecca, Islam's holiest site. They can still do that, but really what we're seeing is still a heightened level of tension. On the front page, there's a photograph showing what purports to be destruction, an office destroyed in the Saudi embassy in Tehran. There's also an article on the other nations, Sudan, Bahrain, that have cut diplomatic ties with Iran, the UAE, who's also downgraded its diplomatic ties. So these are all front and center on the newspaper here. So I think when you look at it that way, the message here is Saudi Arabia is still standing very firm behind the decisions that it's taken and the situation it's in right now. If you listen to what the Saudi ambassador to the United Nations says, he says that, well, we can de-escalate things with Iran, but Iran has to stop meddling in Saudi's national affairs. So that, again, the rhetoric there, it talks about de-escalation, but really the language is still quite confrontational. The Iranians, for their part, their ambassador to the United Nations has indicated, yes, there can be a de-escalation. But obviously both those ambassadors from Saudi Arabia and Iran at the UN are really under the heaviest of international pressure in the spotlight there to sort of de-escalate the situation.
Nick Robertson there, and our senior international correspondent Fred Pleiken is also covering the tensions for us. He joins us now live from London. So, Fred, you've reported from Iran many times. What's that nation's likely next move in the midst of this escalating tension with Saudi Arabia, do you think?
Well, one of the things that we have to keep in mind is that there is somewhat of a rift in the political landscape in Iran. On the one hand, you have hardliners who are not happy, for instance, with the nuclear agreement that the Iranians signed on to. They're not happy also with the fact that the Iranians have this rapprochement with the West going on as well. And they're the ones who want to take a very hard line vis-a-vis the Saudis. For instance, the Iranian Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, he came out and said that there would be, quote, divine revenge for what happened to that prominent Shia cleric. Now, on the other hand, you also have moderate politicians, especially in the current government of Hassan Rouhani, who are trying to walk back from this a little bit. Hassan Rouhani himself has criticized those who broke into the Saudi embassy, has said they would be brought to justice. Iran has already said they've arrested some 40 people. And what Nick was referencing there before in his report, the Iranian ambassador to the UN yesterday said that the Iranians regret what happened there at the embassy and have vowed to keep embassies safe in the future. So we can certainly see that there are some moves on the part of the Iranians to try and de-escalate the situation.
And Fred, if these tensions are not de-escalated, what impact is this all likely to have on the Iran nuclear deal with the West?
Well, that's a very good question. I mean, one of the things that we have to keep in mind is that many Iranians were looking forward to the sanctions relief as part of this nuclear deal. At this point in time, it doesn't look as though there's any threat to the nuclear agreement itself. It is, however, certainly something that if there is a general deterioration in the situation in the Middle East, that could, of course, impact the nuclear deal as well. We have to keep in mind that right now, all of this comes at a very sensitive time in the Middle East, at a very volatile time in the Middle East, and at a time where both Iran and Saudi Arabia are very much in competition in the Middle East. You look at the situation in Syria, you look at the situation in Yemen, you look at the situation also in Iraq. It's all places that if things there get out of control, of course, that could generally lead to a deterioration of Iran's relations with the West that just now have been starting to pick up again.
All right, many thanks to Fred Pleiken joining us there live from London.
All right, at this hour,
I'm the leading state sponsor of terrorism.